Good day, listeners. My name is Josef van Wyngaard. I'm an animal nutritionist based here in South Africa. Technical manager for Voermol feeds. And today I'm going to talk to you about sheep systems, clinical nutrition, and then just how to maximize sheep production systems. And then my approach will be a holistic approach. So I will talk about my information will be broadly based, so I won't go into depth into each topic. There won't be enough time. We can do that at a later point. But just to kick off, I'm actually from, my background is a dairy. So this will be the first and final dairy picture I'll show in my presentation. So usually I kick off with this question: what is the difference? What you can see there, right? So we've got a dairy cow there, and we've got an ewe there with twin lambs. But out of a nutritional point of view, there's no difference between these two animals, because we know a dairy animal is the benchmark in the ruminant industry, right? They've got high yields, milk yields. So what I want to say is that ewes they are also highly specialized ruminants with a very high genetic potential for production. Right, to emphasize this, I did a little comparison with a beef cow, a dairy cow, and then a ewe with twins. I've got their respective body weights and also their average daily milk yield. Right, so if you look at the first column there, beef cow, coming in at about 550 kgs, they would yield more or less 5 liters of milk. And a dairy cow coming in at about 500 kgs, that would be the average between a Jersey and a Holstein, and they would produce more or less 25 liters per day. The ewe at 65 kgs can easily produce up to 2.6 liters a day. All right, so where am I getting to? I want to work out the animal efficiency, right? So we're specifically looking at milk yield efficiency as a percentage of body weight. So what I did is I took the milk yield, I divide that with the body weight, and then you get to a efficiency coefficient. So we know dairy cows are the benchmark. So they sit at about 5%. Let's take that as 100% norm. So a beef cow would represent more or less, let's say 20% of the efficiency of a dairy cow. If you look at a ewe with twins, the column on your right-hand side, they come extremely close to that of a dairy cow, right? So 4%, if we scale that up to 100%, that would be 80% efficiency of a dairy cow. So yes, we're dealing with highly efficient animals. And I'm not even mentioning wool and meat production. So we're just looking at milk yield. Right, so yes, the ewe is also a highly specialized ruminant with a very high genetic potential for production, similar to that as a dairy cow. Right, so if we look at winning percentages, let's look at historical values. We were happy with about 70% to 100% winning percentage. Let's say that's about 40, 50 years ago. Today, in the extensive systems, we're moving towards 110% winning percentage. And in the more intensive systems, we'd like to get up to about 170%. But is that the limit? I know there's some breeds in Canada that they yield up to about 225%. But remember, that's highly intensive systems. The extensive farmers will struggle to get to that point. But what I'm trying to show or point out is just the high production potential of these ewes, of our sheep production systems. Right, but however, with any system that gets pushed too hard, similar to athletes, if you push an athlete too hard, there will be some issues, right, or some consequences. So in our ruminants, if we push them too hard towards production, we're going to sit with metabolic diseases, right, as a result of malnutrition. So some of these metabolic diseases include milk fever, dystocia, prolapse, and a whole list of them. I don't even have all of them on this slideshow. But if you tick one of these boxes, let's say we tick milk fever, right, then we're going to sit with lower reproduction values, lower peak milk production, and at the end with weaker lambs, we're going to sit with higher lamb mortalities, and this will all affect our bottom line at the end of the day. So luckily, we can overcome this by practicing clinical nutrition. So the definition of clinical nutrition is the use of feed and supplements to promote health and to prevent disease. All right, so we know that we're really feeding our animals high quality feed. So, and the animals that we're dealing with they do have a high genetic potential. So to unlock that potential, we need to practice clinical nutrition. And we can do that by following the following primary goals. We want to optimize intake, all right? So you can do that by feeding the correct balance of micronutrients, because that stimulates appetite. We need to minimize catabolism. Catabolism, that's just the breakdown of proteins. So in broad sense, it's just the loss of body weight or weight overall. So we want to minimize that. And then at the same time, we want to maximize immunity, right? So if we tick all three of those boxes, we are practicing clinical nutrition, and then we can unlock the genetic potential of our animals going forward. So we need to remember we're feeding ruminants with 4 stomachs, and in the rumen, there are microorganisms. So we're basically feeding 2 systems. We're feeding the animal and we're feeding the microbes. So further on, I'll focus on each system, how we can go and focus on each of them. All right, moving on. This is the production cycle of a ewe. Let's start there at the bottom left-hand side, flush feeding. So that's usually about 4 weeks prior mating. So we're actually getting our ewes ready for the mating period, right? So that's usually about, you could say, 30 days before mating. Right, let's say our ewes conceived, we're moving into the gestation period. Gestation is usually 150 days, of which the first 100 days, we're only focusing on maintenance. The last 6 weeks before lambing, that is one of the most important stages in this production cycle of the ewe. So we mentioned that the late gestation period or late pregnancy period. All right, then after lambing, we move into early lactation. That would be the second most important stage. That would be the first 4 weeks after lambing or post-lambing. During this time, lamb creep feed is very important. So we're already feeding the lamb directly from about 10 days after birth right up to weaning. And from weaning, we've got 2 different groups where we've got our lambs that we sell, or we fatten them in a feedlot, and you've got your second group of your replacement ewes or your replacement rams that you're rearing for future uses. And then, of course, don't forget about our rams. So throughout this presentation, I'll focus on each production stage. Just briefly, just focusing on a few tips there, a few pointers. All right, so most important, if you would feed strategic supplementation, first one would be at flush feeding. Second would be 6 weeks prior lambing, late gestation. Third would be early lactation, and your fourth would be pre-feed. Right, so this is a busy table, but let's just focus on the first, on the second column there. So just to give you a broad sense of this table, this is the nutritional requirements of a ewe, from maintenance right through breeding, late gestation, early lactation, right up to late lactation. And then I also split it into a ewe with a single lamb and a ewe with twin lambs. So this is the actual protein requirement and the energy requirement, the column on your right-hand side. So let's look at protein requirements. They only require about 85 grams of protein during maintenance, and that can go up to about 300 grams of protein during early lactation. Right, similar energy requirement, very low during maintenance, is about 0.6 kilograms per day, and that can jump right up to about 1.2. So in essence, your protein requirement goes up by 3.5 times, and your energy doubles basically from maintenance to early lactation. So this is important just to show you that you cannot feed a maintenance leak right through the production cycle. You will sit with issues, and the first would be metabolic diseases such as milk fever, ketosis, and so on. This is just a graphical representation of that table. So we've got maintenance coming in right up to mating. the nutritional requirements goes up for the ewe. After mating, it goes down back to maintenance, and about 6 weeks prior lambing, that graph starts picking up again. That's the nutritional requirement of that ewe. After lambing, it starts to reduce again, right back to weaning, when it stays on maintenance again. So I've got two lines there. The blue line, the bottom line, that represents an adult ewe, and the red line just above it represents a replacement ewe, right? So similar flow, but about 10 to 15% higher nutritional requirement for a young ewe compared to that of an adult ewe. All right, so body condition, extremely important in this production life cycle of a ewe. It's got a high impact on the lamb survival, right? So this graph depicts the lamb survival percentage linked to the body condition score of a ewe at lambing, right? So at the bottom of the graph, we've got the ewe's body condition score. That's 1 out of 5. And on the y-axis, or on the left-hand side, you've got lamb survival percentage. We've got two lines there. Twin lamb is the gray line, and the top line is for single lamb. So it's evident here that the higher the body condition score of the ewe at point of lambing, the higher the lambing survival percentage. So that just shows you the importance of body condition in this system. All right, so to kick off, we're going to start with ewe preparation for flush feeding. Remember, that's about 4 to 6 weeks before mating. So my rule of thumb is 30 days prior mating. You continue with flush feeding during the mating season, and you continue another 30 days after you remove the ram. So in total, it should be somewhere in the area of 50 to 60 days for flush feeding. So it's all about body condition score during this stage. We want to ensure that our ewes are stay at about 3 or 3.5 body condition score out of a point of 5 to ensure that they conceive at the end of the day. Right, so flush feeding, usually we look at something like production lick. It contains 15 to about 30% protein, depends on the quality of the roughage on the outside. And it's usually a better lick than your normal protein lick. Right? So it's got a little bit more bypass protein. We'll talk a bit later about bypass protein, what it is. It contains a little bit more energy, and it's more balanced in terms of micronutrients. All right, so as mentioned, the intake of these licks depends on the roughage quality. And usually my advice is stick with one kind of lick or mixture, and you just vary the intake. So you've got a good quality lick, and you vary the intake dependent on if you're moving towards maintenance or flush feeding or lactation and so on. So just to make it practically viable. All right. Benefits of flush feeding: you're increasing the ewe's fertility, so you get more multiple lambs. Research shows that you actually weaning 20 more lambs per 100 ewes mated when applying flush feeding at the correct time. All right. So after flush feeding, that would be 30 days after mating. Then we move into the early mid-pregnancy stage. All right. And that's usually for a period of 70 days. So this would be your second cheapest window after just maintenance. And the main focus here is just to maintain body condition score. We've already built up that body condition score during flush feeding, and now we just want to maintain it. So this would be one of the cheapest feeding periods. It's as easy as just feeding a mineral lick on green felt or green pastures. And usually the intakes, they are very low in the area of about 100 grams per ewe per day. Or you can look at something like a quality protein lick when you've got dry felt or crop residues or stuff like that. And then your intake would be a little bit higher at about 200 grams per ewe per day. If we move on to the late pregnancy stage, that would be the 6 weeks before lambing. Then just to highlight why this stage is so important. So usually we've got about 75 to 80% of lamb growth occurs during this last third of gestation. We've got wool follicle development of the lamb while it's still in the uterus of the ewe. And all of this, this accelerated lamb growth and wool follicle development and so on increases the nutritional requirement of the ewe. So we've got a lot of nutritional pressure during this stage on the ewe. And very important, once again, the body condition score should be correct by this time, right? So we've had enough time to get that body condition score to around about 3.5 during this stage. Otherwise, we're going to sit with lamb survival issues, right? So there's a second problem that we're dealing with at this stage, and that is rumen space. Right, so only roughage is not sufficient. We need to concentrate the feed, feed higher quality feed to ensure the animal actually getting in the right kind of feed for their specific nutritional requirement at this stage. So just to point it out, I've got a nice picture here of on your left-hand side of a ewe with a single lamb, and on the right-hand side a ewe with triplets. So what else can you see there? What difference is there? Obviously, rumen space. So the ewe on the right-hand side has got born lambs. They take up more space, and it's usually at the cost of rumen space. All right. So, but this is now a double whammy. The ewe on the right-hand side, it's got a more or less double the nutritional requirement than the ewe on the left-hand side, but she's got less rumen space. That's why it's very important to feed high-quality feed for ewes during this stage to ensure they get the right quantity and quality feeding for that stage. But just on the topic of quality, I'm just mentioning one nutrient here, and that's protein. I've got a nice visual description here of what is quality protein. So usually protein consists of two parts. You've got your soluble protein or your rumen degradable protein. That would be the line that goes down to the bottom and enters the green circle. The green circle represents the rumen of the animal, and that's where we've got all the microorganisms. So that would be about 70% of protein would fall under this category. So protein that falls in the rumen will be used up by the microbes, right? So none of that protein will go through to the animal. So the rest of the protein, before it enters the rumen, will actually, we use the term bypass proteins or rumen undegradable protein. Rumens cannot utilize that protein, and that protein moves down to the lower intestinal system of the animal, and that's readily available to the animal as amino acids, right? So we know amino acids are the building blocks for proteins such as milk, meat, and wool. So for a highly productive animal, such as the animal in this picture, a ewe with triplets, if we're only feeding protein high in rumen degradable protein, there won't be enough protein for the animal itself to produce high quality milk, meat, and wool. So especially in young animals and high producing animals, we need to increase the quality of the protein we're feeding in terms of protein bypass protein, which is usually, you can say, a natural protein source, such as soybean oil cake or cottonseed oil cake. Right, some of the metabolic diseases, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, I think that was one of the first boxes, was milk fever. So if we hear the term milk fever, we immediately think about dairy cows, but milk fever also occurs in ewes because we're pushing them harder and harder. Right, so very important, milk fever is the catalyst for all other metabolic diseases. So if we can overcome or prevent milk fever, we're going to sit with no issues such as dystocia or ketosis or any of those other metabolic diseases. So just a quick snapshot on milk fever. It's also called hypocalcemia. It's basically a reduction in blood serum calcium. So what happens is the withdrawal of calcium is faster than the replenishment of calcium. And that's due to milk production or colostrum production. Right, so you get two types of milk fever: clinical milk fever, and in any herd, the incidence there is usually about 5%. And then you get a second kind of milk fever, which is called subclinical milk fever. And usually 2/3 of the herd has subclinical milk fever. The main difference between the two is there's clinical signs in clinical milk fever, and there's no symptoms in subclinical milk fever. Right, but both of them has got the same effect. Right? So the ewe will represent or produce slightly less milk, which will affect the growth in our lambs. All right, so luckily we can overcome this as well, or easy to prevent, and that's by means of feeding anionic salts, usually 3 weeks before lambing. Anionic salts include Epsom salt or magnesium sulfate, ammonium chloride or ammonium sulfate. Now, all of these anionic salts are usually readily available at any co-op, and we include that by adding it to the lambing pen feed. And it's usually the feed that's fed, let's say 5 days before lambing up until 5 days after lambing. So it's usually a window of 10 days when we're feeding a lambing pen feed. And we include anionic salts at about 0.5 to 1% inclusion rate. And then the idea is to remove the anionic salts about 10 days after, because then there's no benefit of using it then after. Just to look at some of the late gestation feeding options. You've got 2 options there: total mixed ration, so it's a complete feed. Usually it consists of about 40% grain. There's a concentrate that supplies all your minerals, your vitamins, your NPN sources such as urea. You've got a roughage component. Usually we want to feed a high quality roughage during this stage, such as lucerne. And then you've got your natural protein, such as a soybean oil cake or cottonseed oil cake, with a 5% inclusion. I've added the anionic salts there, 0.5%. Right, so intake of a total mixed ration. We start off, let's say, 4 weeks before lambing. You start just to ease the adaptation phase. Start off with 500 grams per day, and you can pick that up gradually each day or each second day to end at around about 2 kgs at point of lambing. The other option would be feeding a concentrate or a lick. So a lick usually consists of 50% grain, use your energy component, and then a 50% concentrate, supplying the quality protein and the micronutrients. And then with ad libitum roughage, unrestricted roughage intake. So either you supply this lick on felt, or you supply it in a camp with an additional roughage bale on the side. You can also include your anionic salts there. Intakes for concentrate usually start off about 6 weeks before lambing. So traditionally, it was recommended to start off 4 weeks before lambing with a concentrate or a lick. And usually they start off with about 500 grams, 600 grams each day, and they continue that right through up until lambing. And then you sit with a total intake there of about 17 kilograms. New research shows that rather start off 6 weeks before lambing and then gradually pick up your intake. So start off with low intakes, 150 grams per day, and then gradually pick that up each week as you get closer to lambing, so that you end at about 600 grams of lick intake during that last week before lambing. And in total, they would actually eat less lick than the traditional system. You can even start off 8 weeks before lambing if it's practical and practically viable. But during this stage, when feeding concentrate or licks, roughage should always be available unrestricted. This is just one example in Western Cape of South Africa. There's no roughage on our side. You can see there that they've got these lambing camps of about 40 by 50 meters, and they keep about 25 to 30 ewes in a camp, and they only supply a roughage bale there in the background. You can see the bale there in a ring, and then in these shade net feeding troughs, they supply the lick. And that's it. That's enough. But remember, it's a high quality lick with a high bypass level. So just the advantages of feeding clinical late gestation nutrition or applying it. Firstly, you know your body condition score is correct. Remember, it's directly affecting your lamb survival percentage. And then you're also preventing metabolic diseases such as milk fever. You're preventing viscous colostrum, right? So remember, viscous colostrum is usually just after lambing. You get a ewe with a nice big udder, but there's no milk or no colostrum coming out. That's usually due to feeding low quality protein during the late gestation period. So we need to feed high quality protein, more natural proteins, to ensure we don't sit with viscous colostrum during that first week. At the end of the day, when we're practicing clinical nutrition, we sit with more lambs due to that the higher lambing survival percentage. We can practice a stricter selection. So we sit with more fertile replacement ewes, so that can easily increase your lambing percentage there by 14% on that younger group of ewes. And then, yes, you can improve your selection. You've got genetic progress and a sustainable growing herd at the end of the day. All right, now we sit with lambs. Ewes are producing milk. Let's just have a look there at the milk curve. It's very similar to that of a dairy cow. There's a peak milk production, usually at about 28, 30 days. Remember, in dairy cows, they peak at about 60 days. And thereafter, milk starts to decrease. So why this is important, why you need to understand the milk curve of an animal is just to actually introduce to feed the correct lick intake. So there's no need to continue with a high lick intake 30 days after milk in the case of our sheep production systems, because it's a natural process for milk to decrease. So you're actually wasting money if you're feeding high levels of lick intake after 30 days. So rule of thumb is you can reduce your intake, your lick intake by about 40% after 30 days production in either your ewes or your lambs. During this stage, we also need to focus on feeding creep feed for our lambs. So it's much more effective to feed the lamb directly instead of feeding the lamb through the ewe, indirectly producing milk. The reason for this is it's all about feed conversion rate. Right? What is feed conversion rate? It's the kilograms of feed taken in to produce 1 kilogram of meat or carcass weight. So this is just research, all research, where they measured the feed conversion rate of lambs from age groups of 0 to 42, and then moving up to ages of about 160 days. They've got an average weight for that group and a feed conversion. So if it's clear in that first line that the feed conversion rate is at its best for young animals. It's 1-to-1. That animal only needs to eat 1 kilogram of feed to produce 1 kilogram of meat. As the lamb matures, let's say at weaning at about 100 days, feed conversion reduces to about 4-to-1. So they need to eat 4 kilograms of feed to produce 1 kilogram of meat. So very important to focus on this first 40 days or 60 days. You've got your best feed conversion rate. And that's why creep feed is so important, because we can actually unlock this potential of that lamb, where we're feeding less, we're getting more at the end of the day. So lamb creep feed is there to fully unlock the production potential of our lambs, and it includes advantages such as weaning heavier, anything from 3 to 12 kilograms. You can actually wean earlier due to the higher average daily gain and increased feed conversion rate. We're reducing weaning stress on both the lamb and the ewe, and we're actually controlling bacterial pathogens such as coccidiosis. We've got less mortalities because we can feed the animals feed additives via the creep feed. And then, of course, we're sparing the ewe's body condition score because we're feeding the lamb directly. So when do we feed creep feed? And that's always a question being asked. Well, my opinion is as soon as possible. So let's say 7 days, 10 days after lambing. If they do use lambing pens, as soon as the ewes and lambs comes out of the lambing pens, start with creep feed. And it's very easy to adapt the lamb to that. You've got your creep feed pen, as in the picture. On the outside, you open the gate. You feed the ewes feed in the feeding trough for about 3 days, because remember the lamb usually feeds with the ewe. And this is important just for the lamb to become accustomed to this new creep feed environment or creep feeding pen environment. Right, so 3 days after you close the gate, you replace the ewes feed with creep feed, and you ensure that there's enough openings for the lamb to enter and exit. And as easy as that, they are accustomed to the new feeding pen. Typical lamb creep feed specs usually have a 50 to 60% grain component, 5 to 15% concentrate, and very important, their natural protein component of about 15%. It's the reason why I've got milled lucerne in there and molasses meal. It's there as it makes the feed more palatable, and it's got a decent smell. So we want the lamb to increase intake as soon as possible on creep feed to unlock that lower feed conversion rate of that lamb. Okay, and usually intakes, expected intakes there, the first 2 weeks, anything from 3 to 5 grams per day, very little. After a month, it increases to about 100 grams per day. And at 2 months, the intake can be anywhere at half a kg. And then in total, over 2 months, if you've been earlier, or 3 months, if you're more in an extensive system, the rule of thumb is that a lamb will eat more or less 15 to 25 kgs of creep feed. And usually, if you do that sum or that calculation, there's a return on investment of at least 2 to 1 when feeding creep feed. Right, our replacement ewes, very important group. They've got the best genetics of the herd. Remember, we're working with quality rams, quality ewes. That combination yields the best genetics of the herd. They are the future, and the potential is already there. We just need to unlock it with the correct feeding principles. Right, so very important are replacement ewes. They should have a positive growth curve after weaning, similar to this figure. So after weaning, yes, there will be a slight decrease in average daily gain. That's just the weaning stress playing a role there. And then we'd like to continue that positive growth curve right up to target mating weight. Usually target mating weight of replacement ewes are in the area of 80% to 90% of mature weight. And it also depends on the age of mating. So are you mating your replacement ewes at 12 months of age or 15 months of age? With all those factors, you can easily work out your target average daily gain that you want to achieve to ensure a smooth, positive growth curve. We don't want to sit with something like this, right? So this is a stepwise or non-linear growth curve. So after weaning, we chase the young ewes there in a camp there at the back of the farm. We forget about them. And then let's say a month or two before mating season starts, we chase them back in a feedlot and we feed them a high energy dense diet. So we do achieve our target body weight for mating. However, you're going to sit with the following consequences. You're going to sit with 40% increase in open replacement ewes, right? And also the number of twins or multiples will be cut in half. So if we bargained on about 20% multiples for our replacement ewes, we're going to sit with only 10% multiples. And that's all due to malnutrition after weaning right up to the point of mating. Right, so why is that? We know why cell development happens 6 months prior. So 6 months prior, that target weight is right there in that flat line. So we practice malnutrition. And the other issue there, if we're feeding them a high energy dense diet just before mating, there might be an accumulation of fat around the udder, and that will definitely negatively affect your milk production and colostrum. And that will decrease your lamb survival percentage. All right, so we can overcome that by feeding the correct concentrate after weaning for our replacement ewes. That would be a high energy dense diet, similar to creep feed. So that will contain 60 to 70% grain, concentrate 15 to 20%, and then important, include a natural protein component there of at least 15%. Intake will be linked to the quality of the pasture, good quality pasture on the outside, then or felt, then you've got a lower intake on your concentrate. Other way around, the lower the quality of the roughage on the outside, the higher the intake of the concentrate. So we can manage that by weighing the ewes, or just a small group of the ewes every second week, just to see if they are on their target average daily gains. Right, that would be the one group. The weaning group. The second weaning group would be lambs that we're actually selling or putting in a feedlot. So if you're practicing your own feedlot, the concept there is you bring your animals or your lambs directly from creep feed to a grower ration. So we're usually taking lambs at about 20 kgs to 35 kgs. We apply time, feed, costs, and some other factors that I'll mention later. And then we get to a slaughter weight of about 40 to 48 kilograms. So we basically want to add about 20 kilograms over a time frame of, let's say, 60 days. And the main profit driver in a feedlot is feed conversion rate. So if you remember that table that I showed of feed conversion rate of animals, so the younger the animal, the better the feed conversion rate. So we want to get them in a feedlot as soon as possible. Very important, you cannot feed the wrong lamb right. Unfortunately, with each weaning group, there will be, let's say, the bottom 10% or bottom 15% of that group will be lambs that cannot be fed right. All right, so you need to get rid of them. They're going to eat up your margin in your feedlot. So identify them as soon as possible and get rid of them. They're going to mess around your feeding norms. All right, facilities in a feedlot, standing space per lamb, usually about 2.5 square meters. Feeding space, very important, 10 to 20 centimeters. And then shade, you could say almost a 1 square meter per animal. And then animals should always have access to clean water, more or less 5 liters per day. All right, so expected feedlot results in South Africa, this would be averaged over, let's say, about 100,000 lambs. Starting weight of about 25 kgs, end weight 45. I've got a plus there, so the heavier the better. Feeding days, not longer than 60 days, usually 45 days. And then average daily gain, average would be 300 grams per day. However, we'd like to get to about 350, 400 grams per day. Feed conversion rate, lower than 5.5. 4.5 would be ideal. And then slaughter dressing percentage, anything higher than 47%. We'd like to get in the area of 48, 49%. Obviously, breed dependent. And then your average feed intake per day over that feeding period of about 60 days would be 1.6 kgs per day per lamb. Usually I say 1.5 kgs. And then you can expect a total feed intake of about 100 kilograms per lamb over that feeding period. And then if you're dealing with wool-based breeds or multiple breeds, then you can easily show off 1 kg of wool as well, which is a nice extra income there. Your typical lamb grower ration. There's 2 options there. You've got a ration with silage, a ration without silage. Nonetheless, you've got a high grain component, about 60-70%. The concentrate usually consists of about 10 to 20%. And your natural protein source also there, very important, 4 to 5%. Roughage, anywhere from 15 to 20%. So at the end of the day, we sit with a protein of about 16% on dry matter base for the respective total mixed rations. We should not forget about the rams. So just there's a few nutritional goals. This would be my second or my third last slide. So the first goal there in our young rams is for frame development. We can achieve that by feeding us or concentrate with high levels of bypass protein, because a young animal is still in a growing phase, so we need to supply quality. Right, so we want to maintain excellent body condition scores in our rams and throughout the year. So usually we want to sit with a quality lick there, and we want to maintain a body condition score of 3.5 plus. We want to maximize sperm production and libido, and we can achieve that by feeding optimal levels of trace minerals, specifically zinc, manganese, copper, selenium, and then vitamin A, very important there. We want to prevent the formation of kidney and bladder stones. It's a metabolic disease that's got a high level of occurrence in our male animals, and we can prevent that by feeding anionic salts, similar fashion in preventing milk fever in our ewes as well. So lastly, we want to avoid acidosis. Remember, if we're feeding high levels of starch, we're decreasing the pH in the rumen, and that can easily lead to subacute and clinical acidosis, severely affecting the performance of our animals at the end of the day. You can avoid that by feeding feed additives such as ammonia balls. And then the ration that we're feeding should not be high in, too energy dense. Otherwise, we're going to sit with excessive fat partitioning. And that fat partitioning usually occurs around the scrotum of the animal, and that affects fertility of the rams. So we can apply a feed that can tick all these boxes, something like a creep feed that we're supplementing to our lambs. So when you're feeding a creep feed to the rams, there should always be access to unlimited roughage. Or we can feed them a total mix ration, and the specs there would be similar to a starter feedlot ration with more or less a 25% roughage inclusion. And I would say, let's say about 50% or less grain component. So it should not be, you could say a hot ration, it should be a weaker ration. So my take-home message for you, firstly, remember body condition score, extremely important in our sheep production systems, especially for the ewe, to ensure maximum fertility and maximum lamb survival. Late gestation and early lactation would be the most important window to focus on if you want to start off with, introducing supplements. The reason for that is just to ensure high quality colostrum for that lambs, which is directly linked to lamb survival once again. And then lamb creep feed is a must. We saw that there's a high return on investment when you feed the lamb directly than feeding it through the ewe. And then when we wean our lambs and we keep back our replacement ewes or maiden ewes, we want to maintain a linear growth curve after weaning, right, to ensure that we have achieved maximum fertility on our young ewes as well. And always don't forget about the rams. All right, feed the correct feed, which ensures maximum libido, maximum sperm production, and avoiding bladder stones and acidosis. And we can achieve all the above by applying clinical nutrition. All right. So thank you. That's it for today. Any questions can be addressed to my email address there at the bottom, josef.vanwyngaard@longard.com. Thanks for your time.